Thank you very much. I think modern day leadership is knowing which networks are out there internationally, learning from them, and then connecting those networks to your own situation. And I've met TJ in Stockholm, and then in Vancouver, and then in Amsterdam. And I think he's one of those modern day leaders bringing us all here today. So that's fantastic. And not only did TJ do that, but the organization also took care that we wouldn't just fly in for this conference from abroad and then say what we had to say, but connect with you guys by doing walks in the city in the past days. So I've met with a great deal of you guys already, and I was really struck with the enormous open mind and the eagerness to be open and learn. And that's a unique quality, I think. And that's probably going to be your best quality to develop Halifax further in the coming decades. To be open, to really learn, to be able to discuss everything. So that open-mindedness has blown me away. Thank you very much for that. So, quick introduction. We run a team called STIPO. It's an interdisciplinary team for urban development. And interdisciplinary for us is that the city is not just to be understood from the point of view of design, urban planning. It's also culture, it's also an economy. So we have, for instance, a psychologist on board of our team, anthropologist, a sociologist, economists. I'm an urban planner myself. There's an urban designer. So we really take this multidisciplinary view on what a city is and what city development is. And we work on co-creating visions with citywide visions with all the stakeholders until through area development, social innovation, until the very place that we're talking about today, the public spaces. And we're very much a value-driven organization because we feel that we should feel the responsibility that the environments we're creating today, we should create them in such a way that the users of those environments will not only appreciate them, be happy in them, and feel at home in them today, but also 30 years from now, but also 200 years from now. I'm really happy to have heard that this is called the 7th-generation thinking this morning. So we have a large obligation, and thinking through what is really sustainable in cities, we have found that the public space is really a tremendous key. There's more, of course, but the quality of public spaces is enormously important. And that's why we set up an international program with so many wonderful partners globally called the City at Eye Level. Now we chose this title because we find it important to take the view of you and me walking down the street and then experiencing everything we see around us. That's the City at Eye Level idea. So for instance, a street like this, we can discuss whether this is beautiful architecture or whether it's well maintained or whether there's holes in the road. But I hope we can agree that this is a type of street, and this is Thessaloniki, by the way, in Greece. This is a type of street where you would feel at home in, right? As a pedestrian walking down the street, you would instinctively, intuitively feel at home. So what we try to do with the City at Eye Level is to understand what are the mechanisms behind this. What are the mechanisms behind this first gut feeling or this feeling of the heart that you might have walking down a street like this? And then how can we translate those mechanisms and criteria to our new urban development? Because we want this sort of atmosphere in our new development, right? This is creating an atmosphere that hopefully the users will be happy with 200 years from now. So TJ asked me, could you talk about human scale? And Courage and I and a group of people at this conference, we took a long walk down the peninsula. And well, this is the good part about our profession, right? That we get to walk the streets for our profession and just interact with people all the time. And then there's so many, I had to really, due to time reasons now, I had to limit myself to the amount of pictures I could put into this presentation about the human scale. Halifax is such a wonderful city, and it has such a great human scale in so many places. So the human scale is right in front of you, I would say. And the most important thing you could do is to take your leaders, to take your investors, to take your politicians, to take yourself, and walk down these streets and then have a discussion with each other. Why do we find this a pleasant street to walk in? Why do we appreciate this street? Why do we feel at home? And some streets, talking about placemaking, are even not called streets, but are called place. And it's not only the historic development. Luckily, we could find a great deal of examples of new developments that embrace the same qualities as those historic qualities, but then in a new shape. Because I'm not saying you should only historicize and only build back the density that you've built before the war, because that's virtually impossible, right? You need to find a modern day outing of this feeling. This is quite a huge block, quite a dense block, but at the street level, it has the same feeling as those previous pictures. So this is the secret we need to find. And by the way, I had a great conversation with the developer, Louis, of this building, and he told me that, yeah, we're doing this because we're renting out those buildings, we're keeping them, we're renting them out, and we want the first feeling of a candidate tenant to be, yeah, this is where I feel at home. And then once they start renting, we want them to have the feeling that this is where I want to stay. So again, Joe Minakasi was talking this morning about the economics of these things. There is an economic behind this. And actually yesterday I got to talk with Neil, and Neil turned out to have this map about the relative quality, the relative property value. And then so the red areas have the highest value here in Halifax and in Dartmouth. And I asked him, so what are these areas? And I guess you know the city much better. Of course, you do know the city much better. He said, well, basically everything before the war. Now this is something to really give thought. The reason why something has a relatively higher property price means that there's more demand than supply. Simple economics. That means two things for me as an urban planner. First, it means that we really have to do our best, with the pressure that's on the city to preserve a large chunk of these areas at least, maybe even all of them. So there is a discussion about preservation. The second thing this means for me as an urban planner is if people do like this type of street and environment to live in, and they pay so much money for it, there's probably not enough of it. It means you have an obligation to build more of it, and to use the pressure on the city. And Halifax is at a tremendous crossroad right now, where the population is growing in the inner city, but there's a large pressure, and that's a major opportunity to create more of these areas. But then the key question is, of course, how can you do it? And how can you prevent this sort of building from happening? Because, and I don't want to per se criticize existing buildings, but what I do want to take out, because this is even a good block. I would say that from a distance this is even a good block, but on the street level, and this is typically what you get nowadays, these flat facades of large glass surfaces, which are not at all like the qualities that we see in these streets. Right? If I go back a little bit. So there's very little variation in this. It's quite sterile. There's very little interaction actually between the inside and the outside. Okay, this one is still vacant. But if you create a facade like this, then this is not really helping to create that quality that is so well loved that people pay for it. This is a major missed opportunity because this building will be here for the next, hopefully, 200 years for the owner. So in case you might be wondering what you're looking at here, this is a retail space. And you can tell because it says twice on the facade. Oh, no, sorry, 4 times. It says 4 times on the facade. But you know, if you build your facade like this, there's never going to be a shop that will survive here, and shops will feel this, and they will not go into this building. This is a waste of money and a waste of opportunity.
It used to be the Royal Bank.
Okay. So, what are some of the key lessons that we've learned throughout our work with the city at eye level? And we've curated this book that you can download for free because we want everybody to use it. So it's open source. And we haven't written it. The beauty of it, we've written it together with 80 people from all over the world. So this is, again, one of these combined efforts. Well, first, if you look at the sustainability of cities and how cities function through the decades, this is a fantastic study of Alamo Square in San Francisco. And it's 1899 to 1931 to 1976. It's the same area. And if you just look at those different spaces, you see the buildings change over time. But you also see that the public space is the backbone of this area. Once you've created those public spaces, they will be there virtually forever. So that's how important public space is to your city. Second lesson. When cities talk about public space, they often mean the horizontal surface that they own and manage. So is this public space? But if you take the perspective of the pedestrian, you and me on the street, and us experiencing the environment, this is not public space, then this is public space, including the facades of buildings. And the most important part of the building is then the ground floor space that you see when you walk down the street. So what we say is the ground floor may be only 10% of a building, but it determines 90% of the street experience. So actually with the buildings that you help co-create public space. Third lesson, there's this difference between space and place. And what we see, do you know Maslow's pyramid? This is Maslow's pyramid for the human needs. So as a human being, you first want to have food and have shelter and have a roof over your head and be safe. And once you have those desires taken care of, you will want to develop yourself, be social with other people, etc., etc. Well, what we do with public space is that the city tends to take care of only the first 2 layers, right, of this pyramid of Maslow. So the public space is clean, it's safe, it's whole, but it's not necessarily a place where you want to be, where you feel at home, where you feel inspired. So that's where the placemaking idea comes in, and that's something that the cities can't do alone. That's why what we need everybody for. That's a co-created process. And then the fourth lesson we take out of the book is that when we talk about the quality of public space, it's not only the hardware, the design, the way we design it. And very often if a space doesn't function, a city will have the reaction to have a new design made and then to hope that everything will be good afterwards. And very often that's not how it works out. So it's very much first about understanding what we call the software, the things to do, the uses and the activities, the daily activities that people engage in. But then the third angle of this triangle is the orgware. How is it organized? What are the organizing mechanisms behind it? And I wanted to use the rest of my talk mostly to talk about that, because I think we're kind of all aware that we want human scale in our cities. And we're kind of all aware that we want quality public spaces, but so often we don't get it. And why don't we get it so often? What are the driving mechanisms behind that? Well, I could mention very many, but I would like to focus on a couple. Before I do that, just quickly on, because we need to understand then how do we experience the space around us. So how do we see? We look like a frog. Did you know that? Because a frog gave us our eyes through evolution. And if you put a still standing object in front of a frog, they will not see it, because their eyes are only capable of watching movement. If a fly flies by, a frog has to catch it, right? That's how you survive. We have the same eyes, but we can still see still standing objects because we have developed tiny muscles making our eyeballs tremble. But still, our eyes are much more drawn to movement than to still standing objects. Now, what does that mean for our streets? If you make your streets like this, with boring facades horizontally organized, disappearing into the horizon, these are the streets where we interview people, and they walk faster, they feel they're in a hurry, they don't feel at home, they don't turn their heads around. This is actually research done by Jan Gale. And if you have a street like this, we can still debate whether this is a good quality street, but there's a lot of variation, a lot of things happening, a lot of movement. When you walk down the street, every 5 meters there's a new color, a new reason to go in and out, a new scent coming out of the shop. This type of street, people will walk slower, feel more at home more, and this caters for our eyes more. So we can actually count the amount of units that you have on a street, and the great streets on the left, in Amsterdam, they have an average of 20 units for every 100 meters. So every 4 meters, there's a new unit with a reason for you to go in and out. Can be a shop, can be a restaurant, can be a cafe, can be a house as well. And the bad streets in the middle, those tend to have one door every 200 meters, large office blocks with one revolving door, and nothing much happening in the interaction with the street. And this is the research by Gale. Then, how do we listen? Because half of what you experience in public space, and you may not be aware of this, I sure wasn't until I met this guy who called himself an urban acoustic, profession exists. He said, are you aware that the half of what you experience on the street is not what you see, it's what you hear, but it's much more subconscious. So if we create facades like this is when you're moving house, and you took away the carpet, and you took away the curtains and the furniture, and you hear this echo in your house. It doesn't feel like you're home anymore, right? This is how we're treating our cities. So if you have an environment like this has a lot of what the urban acoustic calls sound dispersers, like you would have in a studio or in a good concert hall. Here, you will be able to, there will be traffic along the road, and you'll still be able to have a good conversation, one person to the other, without having to raise your voice. So it's about the sound quality. Then there's this interesting notion of the city should be incomplete. We were talking about this morning, because if a city is incomplete, then it invites the users of the city to co-create the city, the urban environment, and to have a sense of mental ownership over the own environment. This is what people like. Now, who are the architects in the room? Who of you guys are architects and designers? Did you ever get an assignment to create a building that is incomplete? Or who are the developers? Did you ever commission an architect to make a building that is incomplete? So what does that mean? Well, it means, for instance, that if you, as a city, allowed the residents to take out the first tile from the facade and to create a small garden there, which is an official policy that the city of Amsterdam uses, then the residents are responsible for the growth of their plants there, and the neighbors will actually start to compete for who has the most beautiful facade garden in their street. And then the street is co-created, is incomplete, and becomes much more human. So, what are the mechanisms working against us? Well, first of all, there's a lack of awareness and a lack of rules. But the rules are out there. So if you want to use them, just download the book, download the work of Jan Gale, download the work of PPS. It's all online. So there's not a lack of knowledge to use in your own city. Just take that three-dimensional perspective. Don't think that public space is only the two-dimensional space. It includes the facades of buildings. It includes everything you see when you walk down the street. So this is a fairly easy one. Now this is a fundamental one, because we are often working in placemaking, and very often we get asked at the very end of the process. We've done all the bits of planning, and then at the very end of the process we think, we need the area to be alive, let's do some placemaking. Now there's this saying of putting the cart before the horse. Do you guys use that as well? I love that in the Netherlands. Huh? So we share that saying. This is putting the cart before the horse. And of course, it's fantastic to have hammocks here. This is the most photographed place in the waterfront, I think, right now, probably. So people love these types of places, but it's not enough just to think that that is placemaking. Placemaking is creating great places that people will be happy with 200 years from now. So I'm a little bit of a planning nerd. I dove into all the stages of the planning phase. And from the very earliest stage, you already need to start thinking about the human scale. So where you have a general area vision to where you have the master plan. Who are the urban planners in the room, like me? We can have a session afterwards and go through these one by one, if you like. To the urban design, then to the tender. How you tender is very important. I will just give one example, brief example after this. Building designs, public space designs. So there's so much you need to do to achieve human scale at the end of the line, rather than just asking at the end of the process, let's do some placemaking people. Of course, there's the mechanism of the short-term profit of the developer, that just for whom it's cheaper. He will sell the building, and it's cheaper to build a parking garage on the ground floor rather than to invest into a great ground floor space like this. And this is one of the key opponents that we have nowadays, is the standardization in the construction process. You need to be aware of that, because if you don't, then you can't address it in the planning process. So you tend to have these sterile developments that basically could be anywhere in the world. This could be in Amsterdam, this could be in Kuala Lumpur. Actually, it's in Vancouver. So, for instance, what we did to deal with this in Utrecht, in an urban design, next to the central station, we said, let's not have the typical one block, one developer, one tender, one developer, one architect type of development, because it tends to lead to these long, boring facades. But let's break up an urban block into smaller tenders. So what you see here is that there's large volumes to be tendered, but there's also small townhouses to be tendered. These will be private investors who will be part of the urban block and who will create a lot of diversity in the streetscape, a type of diversity that you will never get when you do this one block, one developer type of development. Then it comes down to the management, because great public spaces you don't develop overnight. They are created layer by layer over the course of decades. So you need mechanisms to keep working on the quality and keep improving the quality of these public spaces. So this is a project that we've been working on in Rotterdam, Schouwburgplein. It was ranked the ugliest square in the world by Project for Public Spaces, so we're really proud of that. Actually, it rains in the Netherlands, and somebody thought it was wise enough to put iron on the floor. So when it rains, you slip and break your hip. So we got the cultural institutions to work in a coalition together, to each chip in, and then to launch on a placemaking process. Now we knew that we wouldn't have the money to change the square physically from the start. That's going to be our long-term dream, but we can activate the square in the meantime. So we had these guys who came along. They have the flying grass carpet. So they put the carpet down, and now we have small pockets and places in the area. And on a warm day, you will count up to 80 groups of different people sitting down there, whereas previously nobody would use the space. It would be a void. So good management. Great places not created top-down. They're a game between bottom-up and top-down. So for instance, this place in Rotterdam that we were working on, we ran into this chef who said, from the neighborhood, he said, I want to work on healthy food for the less privileged kids. And by the way, I also collect trains. And we thought he would, midlife crisis, still playing with trains. But he actually meant trains. So you can see that this is the chef, right? And he proposed, he had a former East German restoration wagon and 40 other trains. We still don't know today where he keeps them. And he asked, can I put my train in this terrible space and then have a restaurant and then employ the kids from the neighborhood, the unemployed kids from the neighborhood? And then he started growing his vegetables and herbs in the garden in front of it, and he turned the space into a place. Now, there's no way in a master plan that I could have written this down, even if I would have wanted to. So this you only create if you have a process and a game between the bottom up and the top down, right? And then lastly, and there's so much more we could talk about, but time is limited, there's this idea of this bird's eye view design. This is typically the kind of way that designers could present their design to you, but we're not birds. So I started to get annoyed by this sort of designs. Actually, I want to walk past the building and have that experience, and I want a designer to have that experience. So how could we do that? So we ran into the Technical University Delft, and now we're working with virtual reality to walk past the designs of the future buildings. And that will change the way that designers, developers, politicians will view the building. And we don't use the VR at the end of the line to sell the project, which is done often, but we use it at the beginning of the project to prototype and to find out what brings human scale to this project. Thank you very much.